ever since the 80s, it's been shown like time and time again that there's this real solid link between getting physically stronger and feeling more empowered and feeling more capable in the world. So that's something that you can really, and I think it's a really important thing for everyone to know.
Welcome to the Movement and Performance Podcast, where we explore the value of the body and physical activity for health and quality of life. Today I'm joined by science journalist and author Caroline Williams, and we'll explore how the movements we make influence the way we think and feel. We'll also explore interoceptive awareness, which is all about tuning into internal bodily signals. As a quick heads up, about halfway through the episode, we had a minor technical glitch and switched to our backup system, so you might notice a slight change in sound. Thanks for your patience, and let's get started. Thank you so much for coming on.
Cool.
So I got to read your book. It was very inspiring. And, one of the biggest things that stood out to me was how the body and brain are connected. Mm-hmm. A lot of what I do for work, I'm a physical education teacher. I'm constantly in schools, and I constantly have to sell this to principals, and, so I'm always talking about the connection between the brain and the body. And I feel like, some of what the way that your book was organized, it hit on a lot of the different activity categories. So there was like walking, there was rhythm, there was these different, very specific types of movement, mm-hmm. and how that impacted the brain. And that stood out to me even more because when people just do fitness sometimes, it's just like, you need good aerobic health and you need strength training. But I feel like you touched on why there's these other areas and how they might impact the brain and body and impact differently. So I found it, really cool as a physical education teacher to go through your book. I feel like every phys ed teacher should. But
great. Thank you. I agree.
Yeah. So we'll dive into some of that today. But before I do, maybe if you want to give us a little intro about who you are and maybe what motivated you to write the book.
I am Caroline Williams. I am a science journalist, and so my background, my original career path, I was going to be a PE teacher.
Oh, wow.
Way back. In my first foray into university, I went to do PE teaching. I did that for about a year, and I kind of got slightly distracted by the science. I was more interested in the kind of I guess I was more interested in body mind brain connections than I was the actual kind of sport doing it, because I'm sure you know as well, there's a lot more to movement than just sport, and as it's done in schools, that's sport, and PE is movement, but there's more to movement than that. And in terms of the context of the sort of body brain connection stuff, we tend to think of ourselves as a body that we exercise for fitness, for strength, for a sport or whatever, and a mind that we then have to work on psychologically to try and get the best out of ourselves and all that kind of thing, without really considering that we are a full creature, a brain that kind of came from the body to serve the body. The whole point of having a brain in the first place is to give your body directions in the world so that you can move towards things that are good for you and away from things that are bad for you, and to make better decisions and ultimately survive better as an animal in the world. And so I think we can easily forget that and think body separate, brain separate, but actually, the two obviously are connected by a lot of nerve wiring, all these blood vessels. It's one thing. So I think that can easily get lost.
So you would say that they are deeply connected, right?
Yeah. Not every creature in the world has a brain. And so if you go back way into our evolution, when brains started to show in the sort of evolutionary record, it was about the time when it became important to be able to move with a plan. So moving around the world is too dangerous to attempt without a plan, because something's going to eat you, and you need to find something to eat, and you need to get to the right place to live. And so the whole point of having a brain is to coordinate your movements around the world and to make good decisions, which is where the body-brain connections come in, because these messages from inside the body, what they're telling you to do is, okay, go over here. So you have to be motivated to do that. And so, and you feel thirsty, you go and get some water. You feel hungry, you go and chase something down. You feel scared, you run away. So it's very much one and the same thing. We're not sort of a meat suit with a brain that sort of moves us around. it's all part of the same business of staying alive.
It's almost as if the brain complements the body more than the other way around, right? It's a way to strategize how to move better, more efficiently, more creatively, get a certain thing. But it almost seems like it came through the body in the sense like without the body, the brain might not have a purpose.
Yeah, because if you look back in sort of the evolutionary record, you had nervous systems that were just a couple of, A to B nerves. And as things got more and more complicated, they had to be sort of bunched together into little groups of neurons, and then it got more and more and more complicated, and then some creature hit on the idea of having a bundle of neurons at one end, which in the end turned into a brain. And so what you have when you have all these neurons together in one place is they can talk to each other, and so it's not just sending messages, swim that way. It's like, okay, this is what happened last time. This is what we should maybe do based on this information. So it sort of grew out of directing the body around the world.
And if I'm just thinking about it now, you're making me think, what other species or animal really traveled around the world as much as humans? And then if that's the case, then we had to adapt to many different environments. And every new environment that you go to, you probably had to figure it out. So it would make sense why that brain and body evolution would also kind of co-evolve together.
Yeah, but I think every creature, if you look at every creature, they have the same, they have different bodies, and the sort of nervous system and the brain-body connections will be slightly different because they're great at what they're adapted to do, and we're great at what we're adapted to do. And we're just very inventive and very flexible creatures, and so we've been able to turn our hand to pretty much anything.
So your first book was divided, I'm sorry, you probably have 3 books, right?
I do, but let's just move in a sense for the purposes of
yes.
It's probably most relevant. Yeah.
So the book that I'm referencing, it was divided into it felt like several distinct categories or chapters. You had kind of like rhythm, there was breathing, there was locomotion and walking. Am I missing any big ones there?
The core was one, and also strength was an important one as well.
So do each of those impact the brain in unique ways that the other one can't?
Not really. I mean, I think, so where I get to at the end of Move is like, what you really need is it doesn't really matter how you work out or how you move your body, as long as you are hitting all of these buttons. So, for example, any kind of movement that you do is going to work the core. And so the really cool research about the core was that there is something, so in research tracing back the connections between the adrenal glands and the brain, showed up that if you trace, so the adrenal glands are the first line of the fight or flight response. So most people have heard of that. So they pump out adrenaline, they get you going. And these researchers wanted to know, okay, well, where does that connection happen with the brain? And so they traced it all the way back to the brain, and it showed up in the motor cortex, which is like a sort of a band over the top of the head, which controls voluntary movements of the body. And specifically within that area, it was the area that connects to the core, the muscles of the core. So there's something about movement that regulates the stress response, and specifically something to do with the core, which is kind of interesting for a few reasons. But one is that a lot of, a lot of the martial arts, Tai Chi, and some of the sort of, a lot of the martial arts, I guess, focus on the core and breathing, and they've been found to be very sort of good for reducing stress, and Pilates and yoga and all these kinds of things. And so there seems to be something about the core strength that helps to regulate the stress system, which kind of makes sense to me, because if you're stressed and you try and think yourself out of that, well, that sometimes that can work. But if there's another avenue to controlling your stress system, which is get you some form of movement, then to me that makes a lot more sense. So that's one of the things that came out of it. But again, it doesn't mean you have to take up Pilates to make your core work. It just means that whatever you do, any kind of movement you're going to do, it has to use the core, because that's what stabilizes your whole body. Right.
And is there overlap between breathing and core, do you think?
Yeah. No, the breathing stuff is interesting because it doesn't seem like much of a movement, but we are one of the few creatures that can voluntarily control the rate and the depth that we breathe. And the reason that that gives you a sort of a hotline to the brain, to the mind, is that when you breathe in, specifically through your nose, there's sort of the olfactory bulb, which is at the top of the nose, where you're taking in not only air, but also information like scent molecules from the world around you. And that's so important to the brain that it sort of synchronizes brainwaves across the whole brain so that that information sort of hops on the same bandwidth, basically. So you can more easily put together the information about, okay, there's a bear over there, that's scary, that was bad last time, I need to run. And so being able to control your breath is a way to control your mind through movements. And again, there's a lot of sort of mindful movements that involve core and breathing and sort of moving with the breath and things like that. So there's some really interesting research coming out on that.
That's really cool. Yeah, I'm in the process of writing a book myself. I'm going something along the lines of the big 7 physical activities for health and wellness. But one of the categories I have is mindful movement. So yeah, it's interesting. I'd love to, dive into more of that eventually. But it is its own distinct category, and it is impacting the body and movement in its own unique way.
Yeah, and there was some interesting research when I was working on Move, and I haven't followed it up, and I think I should. I should definitely send it to you as well. Was that, what is it about moving with the breath mindfully that seems to be better for stress and sort of what is it? What's the special source of adding mindful breathing and movement to it? And there was some interesting stuff about, when you talk about breathing into your legs, we know that's a physical impossibility. You don't breathe into your legs, but you sort of know what that means. And it could be to do with synchronizing breathing and blood flow in a way that sort of makes it feel as if you're breathing into your legs. So there is some, I'll dig it out and I'll send it to you, but there does seem to be something special about mindful movement rather than just just mindlessly pumping iron.
Right. Yeah, that coordination, there's something there. So you also had a chapter on rhythm, right? Yeah. So that also makes me think of rhythm in that sense. How does rhythmic movement, or is rhythmic movement unique in its own way, or does it provide any unique benefits, or does it make it different? Why was there a chapter just dedicated to that?
Well, I had to rein myself in because that could have been like a whole book, and people have written whole books about why we move rhythmically. And you think about every culture around the world has some form of, drumming and dancing. It's just something that's wired into us. And one of the things that I really like about the rhythm work is that about moving in synchrony with other people. And so part of the way that you are you and I am me and we are separate from each other is because you have the sense from the inside of your body, interoception, which is what my latest book's about, and also proprioception, which is the sense of where your body is in space. And so when you're moving your body, you know where your body is in space, and you can also see yourself moving if you're sighted. But when you're moving with somebody else who's moving in sort of the same as you, it confuses this system because your movement's matching with my movements, which is how I'm feeling them. And so it kind of blurs the line between where I end and you begin. And there's studies that have been from little toddlers all the way up to sort of boardroom meetings, where if you get people to move in synchrony together and then play a game where they can either sort of stab each other in the back or they can cooperate, they're far more likely to cooperate and care about each other and feel as one if they've been moving together in synchrony beforehand. And the idea is that it sort of basically breaks down these sort of barriers, the sense of self between me and you, and so you feel connected to people. So there's all kinds of cool experiments where, there's a guy called Peter Janata who has invented what he calls the groove enhancement machine, where he gets people to kind of get into a groove together and then solve these problems. And it seems to be a basic human necessity to be together. And with the crossover with walking and running, if you're out walking or running with somebody, you tend to fall in step with each other, and that's a really good way to break down barriers between one person and another.
Yeah, I remember someone titling it the self-other blur.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, but so is it just moving in sync with the person, or does it have to be to a rhythmic beat?
So there's a few things going on. There's also the fact that we like to move at a beat of about 120 beats per minute. It seems to be like a frequency that we just fall into natural step together, which also just happens to be the dominant beat of a lot of rock and pop music in the world, which kind of is interesting because when you think of, dance as a cultural way of bonding people together, that seems to be a natural beat that maybe we've just worked this out, that this feels good to us, it feels good to our people, and we all feel good together. So rhythm is part of us. And there's also a rock and roll frequency, sort of, I forget how many exact decibels it is, but there's a point at which the balance organs of the ear start to vibrate, and it's basically when you start like stamping along with the beat. There's just lots of really interesting kind of feedback mechanisms that mean that when we're moving together rhythmically in time, it just bonds us and makes us feel good, which is why we like to move and dance.
Yeah, the 120 beats per minute also maybe rings a bell to me because it's probably you're aerobic, but you're not anaerobic. So you can kind of like do it comfortably for a steady amount of time. There's probably something to that too.
Yeah, I guess it's a slow jog or a brisk walk. You can kind of keep it going at that rate. Yeah.
So that makes sense. But I guess to a little bit of what you're saying is also making me think that rhythmic movement is happening in a variety of different activities, not just dance.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it happens in yoga, in Tai Chi. I guess if you're swimming with someone, running with someone. I think, in cycling, there's a rhythm, isn't there? And I think this 120 beats per minute has been seen across cycling and running and walking. It just seems to be something that we naturally fall into this rhythm. Yeah.
And so you also had a chapter dedicated, was it walking, locomotion?
Yeah,
Which one was it?
Well, I called it the joy of steps.
The joy of steps.
Yeah, but there was a lot in there about walking.
Right.
And why, so walking's like a multi-purpose activity, and you just think, oh, well, it's just going for a walk. But you can do this 120 steps per minute, and so there was some cool research looking at what happens when you are walking at that rate, and you're putting weight on your feet. And what happens is that at about 120 steps per minute, your step rate and your heart rate, for some reason, I don't think it's been worked out, start to synchronize. And that gives a boost of blood to the brain by about 20%, which is probably just about enough, other sort of experiments suggest, to give you a slight boost. So there's something about getting more blood going around the body and going to the brain. So that's a brisk walk. So I guess if you want to get your head in the game and you're just a bit lethargic, then, brisk walk, 120 steps a minute, boom, done. If you want to be creative, then that's a whole other way of walking. That's sort of more of a meander, sort of like a slow, gentle walk. And research on that suggests that what happens is when you're moving at an easy pace, the sort of prefrontal cortex, the bit of the brain that basically keeps you thinking in sensible straight lines and goal-directed sort of thinking, activity turns down a little bit. And in that state, you're more likely to think broader. So that's when creativity happens. So it's not really headline news that going for a walk can really help you. We've known this for centuries. Like some of the best thinkers in the world have said, go for a walk. It's really good for creativity. But now we have good research saying that this actually happens. And if you send people off for like a 2-minute walk and then get them back and do sort of creativity tests in the lab, for a good 20 minutes plus afterwards, they're a lot more creative and more likely to, think outside the box. So there's lots of things that you can do with something as simple as walking, depending on how you do it. Right.
Yeah, I always tie locomotion and exploration kind of together. It seems like it just, if you think historically or evolutionary or, when we're exploring the world, we're maybe looking for a new terrain. We're probably searching for something, right?
Yeah, well, there's also some cool sort of psychology research where they've got people moving forward through space and ask them about their perception of time, and also in other experiments ask them about to recall memories, good memories or bad memories. And there's something about when you're moving forward in space, because you think of your perception of time, for most cultures, anyway, I think there's a couple where it's not the case, but for most cultures, the future is in front of you and the past is behind your back somewhere. And when you're physically moving forward through space, what it does is it gives you the illusion that the past is further behind you and you're moving forward. So you think it's tied up in our language, I'm moving on now.
Right.
I've got over it and I'm moving on. And that does seem to be how we understand the world. So getting up and physically going for a walk if you're stuck can make a huge amount of difference. And also with the memory experiments, it's easier to recall things that are positive when you're physically moving forward than if you're stationary or if you're walking backwards. They have people moving backwards. It's easier to recall bad stuff. So there's something about physically getting up and going by any means. Doesn't matter if you're sort of on a bike or in a canoe. I guess it doesn't really matter. But physically moving forward feels like you're getting somewhere figuratively.
So do you think that the actions that you do with your physical body will be kind of represented a bit in the brain in some way? Yeah,
so there's a whole field of embodied cognition, which is all about, explaining these things, like when we're talking about, when you're happy, you're on the up, when you're miserable, you're down and you're going forward. So I think that the way we understand the world is sort of constricted by our bodies, and how we make sense of the world, which is by interacting with it, with our bodies. It seems to be the case that how you move through the world and how you interact with things affects how you are thinking about your life and what you need to do next.
And that also makes me think of your chapter around strength, or again, I forgot exactly how you titled it.
But there was Fighting Fit, I think I called it.
Fighting Fit, because it was like some strength stuff, some self-defense related things, and it appears as if those have some unique benefits in the brain as well. Yeah,
so the interesting thing about strength, and this was really solid research that goes back way to the 80s. So the study I'm thinking of was with a bunch of teenage girls, and they did weightlifting, and they did it for 12 weeks. They increased their strength by, I think, 20%, a bit, but not enough that they were suddenly bulging muscles. You couldn't really see it on the outside, but, they felt physically stronger. And what they found was that these girls started reporting that they felt more confident in things that had nothing to do with fighting or strength. They just felt more, so the psychological term is global self-efficacy, which is basically a way of saying, I can handle stuff. And the idea that explains that is again, embodied cognition. So you have these interoceptive, again, messages from within the body, and some of those come from your muscles and your bones. And so they're sort of a background level of information that's like a constant. I think of it like running like a background track in a movie, like and some it's there and it makes you feel stuff, but you don't really notice it consciously. So this information is constantly telling your brain what you can handle in the world, and if you increase the strength of your muscles and bones, then that background track is like, don't worry about it, it's fine. But it does seem to, ever since the 80s, it's been shown like time and time again that there's this real solid link between getting physically stronger and feeling more empowered and feeling more capable in the world. So that's something that you can really, and I think it's a really important thing for everyone to know. But especially people who, may be disadvantaged in some way and may not feel they can stand up and be heard, that increasing physical strength can have this kind of tip over effect, sort of subconsciously, so you feel.
Yeah, I love that. That's starting to go into like the intuitive piece I wanted to talk about as well, but this will sound off related, but it'll make sense. When I was growing up, city kid in Brooklyn, we would kind of hang out in the street a bit, but jumping on the mailbox was like a cool thing to be able to do. And so I would, we're just walking, and sometimes I'd just jump on, things. And as I've gotten older, or, whatever it is, maybe I see a sign, I want to jump over it. There's always this like jump on or jump over, right? So. But even as an adult, if I'm walking, if I feel comfortable, if I feel creative, I'm hanging out with friends, I feel playful, I'll see something, I'm like, oh, I want to jump over that. And sometimes I'll look at it and say, I can do it. And I'll look at it and say, no, I don't. There's something telling me that's a little too high.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know the exact height at which I haven't measured it.
Yeah.
But I intuitively, there's this, it's almost as if my body already knows the height that it can jump on.
Yeah.
And I start to feel the confidence of, oh, I got this, no problem.
Yeah,
or I kind of feel a little like, I'm a little nervous right now.
Yeah, I might bang my knee on the way up. Yeah, I mean,
Right.
that's the embodied knowledge because you've done it, and I guess it's important that you've kept doing it as well as got older and your body has changed, and you've still kept up that practice. Whereas I think a lot of people just stop doing that stuff, and so yeah, the idea of jumping on anything gets a bit foreign.
So the intuitive, or your second book, what's the title?
It's called Inner Sense.
Inner Sense.
Yeah.
And so why did you dedicate a whole book just to that?
Well, a few reasons really. One, because in neuroscience, when I first started as a science writer, I pretty much spent 25 years mostly looking at neuroscience, which is, for most of that time, just being brain-based. All you care about is what's happening in the brain. And then as time's gone on, it's become obvious to neuroscientists as well as everybody else that the brain is attached to the body, and what happens in the body is important to the brain. So there's this real moment in neuroscience where people are saying, okay, so what does it mean, to detect physiological changes within the body, and why does the brain care so much about it? There's whole huge sort of amounts of real estate in the brain dedicated to this sense of interoception, which is what the inner sense is.
Right. Yeah. It almost sounds to me as if your conscious awareness is a form of wisdom, and then your interoceptive awareness is a form of wisdom. And while all of these may have their strengths and weaknesses, they're all just providing some type of feedback that you should listen to.
Yeah, so it sort of all needs to be in the picture, really. So you need to be aware of it, but not put too much onto it. You need to be aware of what's around you. You need to be aware of, things that have happened to you in the past. All this thing has to be a sort of a whole picture. But I think there's definitely an argument to make that because we're so in our heads all the time and so distracted all the time, and you can't pay attention to the outside world and to your interoceptive sense at the same time. It doesn't work like that. There's not enough processing power in the brain to keep track of everything at once. So if we're always overstimulated and not paying attention to what's going on our insides, then we're sort of cut off from that strand of our wisdom. So that's really the argument for listening more. Not that it's always right, but we often don't notice it or don't question it when we do notice it.
And so when we're thinking about the sensations that we feel, can we divide it into exteroception, interoception, or would those be senses and sensations? How can we classify those two?
So exteroceptive senses are basically the ones you learn about in school. So, your eyes, your ears, your normal sense of touch, although there is a form of touch that counts as interoceptive for sort of wiring brain reasons that I won't bore you with. But basically exteroceptive senses are those that deal with information that's coming from the external world, so outside of your body, so things you can see, things you can hear in the environment around you. Interoceptive sensations are those that come from within your own body. So that's the difference really. But the brain really takes it all together, puts it all together, and comes up with an overall picture of what's going on and what maybe we need to do to solve any problems and to move forward.
And so I think many people, it's a buzzword that's starting to become more and more on the scene. I feel like I've heard it many times, but I also dive into a lot of neuroscience. I think for the average person, interoception, they may know it, they might not know it, but what are some of those signals that might be coming from the body? I know, I'm thinking the heart, the gut.
Mhm.
Are there certain places that these signals are probably coming from that we're tuning into?
Yeah, so I sort of think of it as there are three different types of interoceptive signals. So there's some that we'll never be conscious of, but the brain is very aware of them all the time. So, for example, what's going on in your kidneys right now, no matter how hard you focus on your kidneys, you will never feel what's going on there. And if you feel that, you've probably got a kidney stone, and it's a big deal and not ideal. So there's lots of stuff going on in the body that the brain knows about. We don't need to consciously do anything about. So that's the sort of ones, to all intents and purposes, you can sort of shelve those and leave them on one side. Then there's the ones, as you mentioned, so like the heart, the lungs, the gut, the bladder. These are, they're sort of on a, not quite a don't call us, we'll call you basis. You can consciously choose to tune into them to some extent. But if something important happens to change your rate of breathing, or, you're hungry or your heart starts racing, that will burst through to consciousness and it will tell you to pay attention. You won't be able to avoid it. So that's sort of the second level. And the third are the sort of the sort of spidey sense ones that are sort of somewhere in between. You can't pinpoint them to any particular organ, and you can only sort of pay attention in a general sense. But these are sort of more like background sensations. So sort of I think of them like mood music in a movie. So something might change. You change the way you feel, you don't feel safe anymore, you feel on edge, whatever. You can't pinpoint maybe what exactly has changed, but that is based on some physiological change in your body. So that's the sort of the three kinds really of interoceptive sensations.
Mm. So if people start to tune into these a little bit more, can it improve areas of their life? Does it have potential to, I don't know, maybe improve relationships, workspace, whatever, maybe anything, any type of performance in their life or anything in their life?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it has a huge potential. So, there's a lot of work. Most of the work that's started into this has been to do with mental health and well-being because, the obvious problems that when you have a problem with interoceptive processing are things like panic disorder, anxiety. This is when your body kind of overreacts or the brain underreacts to what's happening and it causes these kind of very physical, visceral symptoms. But more generally, I think we can all benefit from paying a bit more attention to what's going on and being curious about what's coming up. And part of the reason for that is that it helps us to self-regulate. So if we can get a handle on what's changing in our bodies, we know what to do. We can tell the difference between maybe anxiety and excitement. We can tell the difference between being hungry and bored a bit easier. And also these bodily sensations, they sort of underlie empathy. So when we're with somebody else and they're feeling an emotion, we feel that same emotion, not because we're recognizing external signs in their body, but partly because our own bodies change to match theirs. And so we're literally feeling what they're feeling at a lower sort of extent. And so if we can be a bit more in tune with what we're feeling, it helps us to connect to other people a lot better, and also have a better relationship with ourselves and our own body, and just feel just feel better in general. I think there's a huge potential to fix a lot of the things that ails us in modern society: loneliness, fatigue, stress, all these things. With a bit of interoceptive wisdom, we can improve on.
Yeah, I think we're social creatures, so that's probably a huge part of it. From my
Mm.
understanding, people's heart rates can almost like link up in some
Hmm.
scenarios, like our heart rate starts to beat at the same
Yeah.
tempo. So yeah, I think when I might have seen some studies where if the heart rate is out of tempo, people probably feel disconnected, whereas when their heart rates are in sync, they feel more connected. So
Hmm.
like that, just that social piece of the awareness of what you're feeling, syncing up with other people. There's definitely something to it. And
Absolutely.
go ahead.
Yeah, and there's lots of, there's some research, it's sort of to do with synchronizing brain waves, but also sort of physiological signs, the heartbeat and things like that. So if people are enjoying music together, they tend to synchronize. If you're walking with somebody, your movements and your heartbeat and all start to synchronize. And so, yeah, we are definitely people that need other people. And Lisa Feldman Barrett, who's a really great neuroscientist, and she describes it. She says, the best thing for your nervous system is another person, but also the worst thing for your nervous system is another person, because depending on your relationship and how connected you are,
Mm.
that can have a huge impact on your well-being. But half the battle is knowing how you're feeling and working out why. So having that sort of clarity on how you're feeling when you're with other people can be really helpful.
And is there anything, I remember in your book, there was a story, if you don't mind sharing, about the extreme end of maybe being disconnected and how the individual was playing the video game and past maybe. Is there something that you can speak to with that maybe where in an extreme sense, while it's an extreme scenario, it still speaks to the point of when you're disconnected from these sensations, how it can impact you?
So yeah, it was about 20 years ago. There was a computer gamer in South Korea. He was called Lee Seung-seop, and he died after playing an online game, StarCraft, for 50 hours straight without taking a break, which is shocking. And then this wasn't the first time it had happened. It had happened sort of before and since. And when they sort of did the cause of death, officially it was exhaustion and heart attack and dehydration. But really, what had happened was he was so into this game, he was so focused on what was in front of him that he ignored all his body's signals that were asking for food and water and presumably go to the bathroom as well. And that was too much. And so if you ignore these signals, eventually it's not ideal. That's obviously an extreme. It's obviously an extreme example, but there is some research suggesting when we are sitting at our desks, looking at emails, that we're not breathing properly. We're not noticing, well, nothing's changing in our bodies, so our heart rate's not changing, so we sort of almost tune out to our bodies. So yeah, there's a lesson in there somewhere to make time, even if we're sort of desk bound, to get up, move around, and tune into our bodies now and again.
Right. Yeah. It's helping us to navigate the world. It's helping us to tell us what we want, what we need, right? If I
Yeah.
feel hungry, I now know I need to go get food. If I now ignore that sensation, I'm just kind of, right, not giving my body what it needs. So it's, I think, a way to be efficient and pay attention to what your body needs before it's too late or becomes an extreme thing that now it's in panic mode and then you have to, pay attention to then. But then it also helps us just to, I think, feel better and more connected with ourselves because life is about experience, right? I mean, like if that's the most exciting part of life is the enjoying it. So how do we, I think when we navigate and understand what we need, we can start to put ourselves in environments and places that make us maybe feel more comfortable and maybe feel more alive. And, the best part of life you now actually get to experience because you are able to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when we become a bit more curious about what we're feeling and why, we'll be able to tell the difference between, hunger because we need energy, but also sometimes we eat because we need comfort, and our gut sensations are wrapped up in sort of feelings of comfort and feeling okay, like you don't need to go and do anything. And so that was for good reason during our evolutionary past, because if hunger didn't feel bad and being full didn't feel good, then we would either sit in a cave and not bother going out because it would be dangerous out there, or we just keep eating and not do all the other important things in life. So, but the trouble is now we've got easy access to food and we don't necessarily need to go anywhere and do that. It can get mixed up, this kind of comfort eating, and not actually having to, not fulfilling the need that we think we're fulfilling. So yeah, that's where sort of a little bit of curiosity comes in, and sort of paying more attention, you start to pull these things apart a little bit. That's half the battle, is sort of noticing.
Yeah. And I think today that's a major concern, like, and not something to take lightly because of technology. I think,
Mm,
we're, so stuck in tech world and also maybe a lot more sedentary than ever before. So we're
mm.
less embodied, we're less, out there experiencing and a lot more sitting and virtual. And I think that piece can make us more disconnected with ourselves, where this is almost like the medicine uh,
Mhm.
to a lot of the common problems that we're facing today. Uh,
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is where, where movement comes in, because the easiest way to change the signals coming from your body is to get up and move, and then suddenly your muscles are sending messages, your blood is pumping, your heart's pumping, you're breathing deeper, you're stretching. So all that sort of, anything that isn't being sedentary just activates everything. And so yeah, you've got more to do. Your brain's got more to do, your body's got more to do, and it's overall better for us, because that's what we're designed for. We're not designed for sitting and
yeah.
staring at screens.
So you just touched on it a little bit, but if somebody wanted to be more connected to their interoceptive awareness,
Mhm.
are there any things that they can practice or do? I think you just said movement, but
Mhm.
maybe any other tips or strategies you might give someone to be able to do that?
Yeah, so there are sort of really two ways of going about it. One way is to, as I just said, with exercise, you need to boost the signal in some way. So there have been some studies by Sarah Garfinkel and her colleagues. She's at University College London. And they've done some training studies where they've basically got people to exercise for a little bit to raise their heartbeat to a point where they can feel it quite easily. And then they stop and they tune into that. And as it goes back down to normal, they tune in and pay attention to it. It's sort of like a mindfulness exercise almost. And the idea with that is if you're able to feel your body sensations, heartbeat, but there are others as well, at different levels of arousal, then you'll have a better chance. If your heartbeat starts going up because you've got an email that makes you upset, you'll probably catch it at a lower level before you start spiraling. So, and this is what's been shown in those studies, that people who were anxious at the start, a year later after this short training period, they weren't anxious anymore. They'd learned to tune into their body and know when to get in and self-regulate. So that's sort of like changing the signal. Also with eating, there's one kind of cool study I heard about at a conference where they'd got people to wear a tight shapewear t-shirt as they were eating, and people who did that were better able to tell when their stomachs were full than people that were just wearing a loose t-shirt. So you can kind of find ways to make it easier to detect certain sensations. So you can boost the sensation, the bottom up signal from body to brain, or you can find a way to make it easier to detect them. So one thing that I tried was flotation therapy, which is, lying in very salty water. It's body temperature, you're in darkness, earplugs in, and there's literally nothing to feel or see or hear. You can't even feel where the water ends on your skin and the air starts because it's all kept at body temperature. And so what that does is it takes away all external sources of information. So all the exteroceptive information is gone. And so that makes it a lot easier to tune into body signals, so the heart, the lungs, even things like the strength of your legs from inside, and the shape of your body from the inside, rather than looking at it in a mirror. So that's one way of sort of making it easier to tune in. But obviously that's not accessible to everybody. It's not necessarily cheap or available. But another way of doing that is doing a body-based meditation where what you're being mindful of is your heart, your lungs, your blood flow, any areas of tension, any areas of relaxation, and just taking time to go slowly through your body and see how things are feeling. So yeah, I mean, and also one thing I did when I was trying to become more interoceptively aware was set a timer on my phone. There was a random reminder app I found that you can set it to go off 3 times a day at random intervals. That will just say, tune in. And I would stop what I was doing and just go, okay, what's happening? Am I tense and need to go and have a stretch? Am I a little bit peckish? Am I a bit lethargic and I need to go and walk on the block? And so it can help just to remind yourself to notice this as you get better at kind of noticing that you have a body. That's half the battle.
Yeah, it sounds like just paying attention in some way,
Yeah.
right? Because I'm giving my attention to this right now, so that's what is in my awareness. But if I stopped, closed my eyes, tuned some of my, some of the outside senses, I kind of try to shut them off, and then you start looking a little more inward, and then I pay attention to those things that I feel in my body, and I just direct my attention there, which is probably, like you're saying, a form of meditation. But
Yeah.
that attention shifting sounds like, just paying attention to it.
Yeah. And the other key thing is that once you've learned to put your attention sort of inside your body, it's important to also be able to disengage and put your attention back in the world, because we obviously need to know what's going on around us, because this is a whole, to work out what we need and what we should do and how we should feel, you need all of that information. So it's almost like, I describe it as like sort of emotional version of potty training. So you learn a long time ago that you feel these sensations from your bladder or your bowels, and you go to the toilet and you deal with that. And then you come back and then you move on with your life. You don't spend the rest of the day tuning into your bladder going, do I need to go? Do I need to go? Unless you're nervous about something, maybe you might do that. But for kind of things like feelings of anxiety or stress or tension, once you've noticed them and you've kind of said, okay, this is something I need to deal with, then you deal with that. and then you tune out from that and you get on with your day, because otherwise the danger is you might become too inward focused, and that's been shown to not necessarily be a good thing. People who are anxious are too internally focused sometimes. There seems to be something to do with, in anxiety, people are more focused on what's going on inside their bodies, but they're less accurate at knowing what's going on. So that's where the training came in that I was talking about. So if you can close the gap between what you think is going on in your body and what's actually going on, then you have a much better information to be working with.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
but
that's interesting. That's making me think a lot. Yeah, so I think balance is good, right? So if
mm,
I think many people in our world are probably a bit disconnected from their body, so can become more embodied. But there's
mhm,
a such thing as becoming too focused or hyper focused on that, where that can
yeah.
also become an issue. So of course, I always definitely believe in the principle of just balance in almost everything. But
Mhm.
do you also think that, just generally speaking, people who move and have movement in their life very frequently just tend to also be more connected with that interoceptive awareness? Because my thought process is, as you're moving, you're going to feel a lot of sensations inside. You're breathing heavy, your muscle hurts, I got a cramp, but all the sports, whether you're an athlete or just an avid mover, whether you move a lot, um, it seems like you'd probably, just that alone would help to make you more interoceptively aware.
Yeah. So that what kind of being active and moving a lot gives you is more embodied experience of how things are. And so, a friend of my son's, when he was younger, came from a not particularly active family, and if we take him for a walk and force him along for a walk, like we always go out, it wouldn't be long before he was like, my legs are tired, my legs are sore, and you'd be like, yeah, they're just warming up. Come on, and you know that because if you've been forced out on walks since you were a toddler, you know that your legs are warming up and you'll feel fine in a minute. But if you haven't had that experience, it feels like pain and tiredness and you need to stop.
Mm.
So that's half the battle, I think, is kind of having embodied experience that it's fine and it's safe to be in these different levels of arousal or, tiredness, and that it's all going to be fine and it's going to get back to normal. There's interestingly some research in athletes, in elite athletes, which showed that elite athletes are more, as you might expect, interoceptively aware and sensitive than non-expert athletes, but they're also more likely to ignore them and push through, which
Mm.
kind of makes sense because, if you're going to become an athlete, you have to push through a little bit. But it also, and I wish I had the answer to how to make sure this doesn't happen, but there's also the risk that you push through when your body is saying, okay, stop now, you're going to do yourself some damage, and that you push through and cause more damage. So overtraining is a problem for athletes. And also, a bit of a sort of separate issue, but sort of related. There's some research that's being done by researchers who are working with the French military into soldiers and overexerting themselves and getting heat stress. And this is a problem, going forward, they're planning for a warming world. And what the research suggests so far is that if soldiers aren't very interoceptively aware, they're more likely to push through because, like the elite athletes, they're like, no, we're going to do this, we're going to push through, and are more likely to get heat stroke and cause themselves some serious damage. So there's talk about, maybe it would be a good idea to train people within athletes and the military on, and everybody, in a warming world, that we should be able to have this information and know when it's serious and know when not to push through. Yeah, and I guess that goes for all of us in some regards.
Yeah, it sounds to me like when the motivation outweighs health. Like, for example, extreme athletes, or my goal is to get to the top of Mount Everest. I don't necessarily care about my health. I just want to get there. Right? Some
Yeah,
people are trying to reach this ultimate goal. So I think if your ultimate goal is the performance piece, you're probably willing to sacrifice your arm or your leg almost
yeah,
literally to be able to get this thing. And now I finally got it, and I'm the only one who did. So I'm sure motivation, what your motivation is, plays a role. And you know, I think if your motivation is health, you'll probably start to feel that thing and stop, as opposed to feel the thing and say, I don't care. This goal is more important.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, one thing I also feel like is the athletes are also becoming more accurate. I remember reading this somewhere and I forgot where. It might have been oh man, I'll get the author afterwards. I could picture his face. I'm such a visual person, but I can't think of his name. But wait, Alex. Oh man, I'll get it. I'll get it before we go because his book's on.
Alex Hutchison?
Yes, Alex
Yeah.
Hutchinson. Yes, yes. Where you're able to get action closer to your real limits because your
Hmm.
body's not panicking so soon, right? If I've never done this before, I've never been in this environment before, my body's going to put on the panic system fast, like, oh, get water, get this, get that. We're nervous. Don't, push yourself too. But as you've pushed yourself more and more, you can actually get closer to your real limit. Your body will
Mm.
say, all right, we don't need to get water yet. We don't have to panic. We don't have to rush. We're good. We're safe. We've been here before and we can get closer and closer to what those real limits are. But I would think that those athletes are very, very, very aware of what's going on, and some are aware that they're hurting themselves and
Mhm.
still just making that conscious decision to push through it. But they're aware that it's happening. They're aware they're in pain, and I think they know it. And I would think that the athletes are very in tune with what's going on and how to get close to those real limits and not. And some people probably push themselves over, but they're doing it intentionally.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah. Oh, the interesting thing is about what you just said about, being able to go closer to your real limit is that there's some research that, the social piece plays into this as well. So in studies with people who were asked to row to exhaustion on a rowing machine, people who had a trusted friend or partner with them when they were doing it were able to keep going for longer and to expend more actual energy while they were doing it before they collapsed and gave up. And the interpretation of that was that knowing that when you're making these estimates of how much energy you've got and how much you've got in the tank, how much you've got to give, you factor in the support you've got. And if you've got someone there that's going to carry you home afterwards, or just say, no, they're there, it's okay, and, give you a massage and maybe look after you, you can afford to dig deeper. And so, yeah, your performance goes up. And the same's been shown of pain as well. Yeah, and energy fatigue levels. So, yeah, again shows why we should always have good friends around.
Yeah, exactly. Man, I feel like I could go on and on with you. I'll try to tame myself a bit, but ultimately, I personally feel that that interoceptive awareness piece is super important today. And of course, we do need to find balance and do need to have a ultimate goal of health in order to stay in a healthy place. But many of us are a bit disconnected and probably can become more reconnected a bit. And by doing so, I see it almost as if it's a superpower to some degree that, or I mean, really, it's just a piece of wisdom that we've become so disconnected from that it might seem like you have a superpower because other people don't have it. But I think you're able to pick up on things. You're able to pick up on things in your environment. You're able to pick up on things with people, with social things. There's a potential to be able to connect with people more, maybe even be a better leader to some degree, maybe a leader in your household, maybe whether it's at work. But and then my own self, am I giving myself what I need? Am I realizing that this is not good for me and I should go somewhere else, whether that's with relationships or whether that's with um, just even my own life. Again, back to the work piece. Am I enjoying it here? Do I like it here? How do I feel when I get in this place? Is it
Mhm.
good for me? As soon as I step in the room, I'm aware and I kind of know this is where I want to be, this is where I don't want to be. But you end up having this access to this whole other piece of wisdom that other people are disconnected from. And it almost can be as if it's a superpower in today's world because so many people don't have it, you know?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that's now becoming sort of like a health thing that actually our ancestors would find ridiculous that we didn't even notice. Like things like forest bathing. You need to get out in nature and you'll feel better and listen to the birds or whatever. That wasn't even a question. We didn't have a choice back in the olden days. And the same with interoceptive. We weren't distracted like we are now. So yeah, it takes a little bit of work in the modern world, but all of it kind of makes intuitive sense when you think about it. It really isn't rocket science. It's just, the difficult bit is for the scientists who are trying to work out, okay, well, how does this work? How does the brain decide whether to listen to the body, or the brain, or decide to put more focus on what's around them? How did people differ, and why do they differ? And can we intervene when people have a problem with this conversation between body and brain? So the complicated bit is for the scientists. For us, yeah, I think half the battle is just knowing it's there, and sort of being curious about what it all means, and then seeing where it takes us.
Yeah. Yeah. Those were pretty much all the questions that I wanted to hit. I always open the floor just in case there was something I missed, if there's anything you wanted to share. But also no pressure. But anything that we might have missed or that you feel good?
Oh, crikey, probably lots, because there's a huge amount in the book, so much so that when I start talking about it, I'm like, oh God, I know I've forgotten something. Um,
Well, that's
but
a good reason for people to read your book.
Well, exactly. There's lots more. Yeah, yeah. There's almost too much in it for me
Yeah.
to keep track of. But no, it covers a lot, from energy to pain to addiction to pleasure to social awareness to sort of the political landscape and why it makes us feel uneasy and how interoception can help. So yeah, there's a huge amount um, to kind of explore. So
And
yeah.
how can people stay connected with you?
Well, my website is carolinewilliams.net, and on Instagram, I am Caroline Williams _science, and that's where I'm mostly found. I am on another couple of platforms, but less reliable on those. So,
And
yeah.
your two books?
Oh, my two books. Yeah, so Move is one, and the latest one is called Inner Sense. So yeah, you can find all about those on my website, and they're sold wherever good books are sold. It's out in the US now, and Canada, as well as in the UK, and I've got a few translation copies in the works as well. So yeah, wherever you live, you can probably find a copy. If not
Aw-
now, then soon.
Awesome. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for today.